The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council had been going on for 6 hours. Representatives from 43 worlds sat in their floating chairs around the massive crystal dome that served as their meeting hall. The air was thick with tension and the smell of fear from dozens of different alien species. Admiral Kethvar of the Altarian Republic stood at the center of the dome. His blue skin had turned pale, and his forearms trembled as he held the latest battle reports. The news was bad, very bad. Kepler-7 has fallen, he announced to the silent assembly. The Zarathi swarm consumed the entire system in less than 48 hours. 3 billion Centaurians are dead. Their defense fleet lasted exactly 12 minutes. A ripple of shock and despair ran through the gathered aliens. Ambassador Zeth Prime, whose crystalline body normally sparkled with inner light, had turned completely dark. The aquatic Neptari delegation huddled together in their water-filled breathing suits, their tentacles wrapped around each other for comfort. That makes 17 systems in 3 years, continued Kethvar. The Zarathi grow stronger with every world they devour. Their bioships adapt to our weapons. Our best tactical computers cannot predict their movements. They learn from every battle, and we lose more ships each time we face them. Commander Yila Santos of the Neptari Federation raised one of her tentacles. What about the new plasma cannons developed by the Vorthan Empire? Surely those can penetrate their organic armor. Admiral Beth Cora, a tall gray being with 6 eyes, shook her head sadly. We tried them at the Battle of Proxima Station. The Zarathi absorbed the energy and used it to grow their ships larger. They turned our own weapons against us. The dome fell silent except for the quiet humming of the life support systems. Every species in the coalition had tried their best weapons, their finest strategies, their most advanced technology. Nothing worked. The Zarathi swarm kept coming, kept growing, kept consuming everything in their path. How long do we have? Asked a small voice from the Zephyrian delegation. Kethvar looked at his data tablet. Our scientists estimate 6 months before they reach the core worlds. Maybe less if they split their forces. The admission hit the assembly like a physical blow. The core worlds housed over 200 billion beings. If the Zarathi reached them, it would be the end of galactic civilization as they knew it. There must be something, whispered Ambassador Zeth Prime. Some weapon we have not tried. Some alliance we have not made. Actually, said a quiet voice from the back of the dome, there might be. All eyes turned to Dr. Vel Kim, the coalition's chief xenobiologist. The elderly Altarian had been silent throughout the meeting, hunched over a small communication device. Now she stood slowly, her scientific robes rustling. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations picked up a quantum transmission from an uncharted system. The signal was directed at us, but it came from a species we have never encountered. She activated her holographic display. A blue and green planet appeared above the assembly, rotating slowly. They call their world Earth. They call themselves humans. The transmission was simple but unusual. The hologram switched to display text in the coalition's common language. Dr. Vel Kim read it aloud. To the Galactic Coalition. We have monitored your broadcast about the Zarathi threat. We are a warrior species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of combat. We offer our military assistance in exchange for membership in your coalition. We have been fighting each other for millennia. Let us fight for you instead. Signed, Terran Defense Command, General Patricia Kane and Admiral Richard Fox. The dome erupted in confused chatter. Warriors from an unknown world? Most coalition species had evolved past the need for warfare centuries ago. They had police forces and defense fleets, but the concept of a species dedicated to fighting was almost alien to them. What do we know about these humans? Asked Commander Yila Santos. Dr. Vel Kim manipulated her controls and new images appeared. Our long-range sensors show a single-system species with a population of approximately 8 billion. They have not yet achieved faster-than-light travel, but their planet shows extensive signs of technological warfare. The images were disturbing. Cities with massive walls and defensive systems. Orbital platforms bristling with weapons. Ships that looked more like flying fortresses than exploration vessels. They appear to be constantly at war with themselves, continued the scientist. Our initial scans detected over 200 separate nations on their planet, many with active military conflicts. Their technology is primitive by our standards, but they seem to specialize in weapons development. Barbarians, muttered one of the Vorthan delegates. What could such a primitive species offer us that our advanced civilizations cannot provide? Kethvar studied the images carefully. There was something about the human ships that disturbed him. They were ugly, brutal-looking things covered in armor and bristling with weapon ports, nothing like the elegant, efficient vessels of Coalition design. Perhaps, he said slowly, that is exactly what we need. The assembly fell quiet again. The idea was radical, almost unthinkable. The Coalition prided itself on being civilized, on solving problems through diplomacy and advanced technology. To invite a warrior species into their ranks went against everything they believed in. But the Zarathi were coming, and nothing else had worked. Ambassador Zeth Prime was the first to speak. What exactly are they offering? Dr. Velkim consulted her data. According to their transmission, they can field what they call a rapid response fleet within 30 days. They estimate their force at 50 warships and 20,000 soldiers. They also mentioned something called unconventional warfare specialists. 50 ships? Scoffed Admiral Beth Cora. We have lost entire fleets of 500 vessels to the Zarathi. What difference could 50 primitive ships make? Maybe the difference is not in the number of ships, suggested Kethvar quietly. Maybe the difference is in how they think about fighting. He gestured to the holographic display showing Earth. Look at their planet. Every nation has weapons pointing at every other nation. They have never known true peace. While we have spent centuries building art and culture, they have been building better ways to destroy each other. The truth of his words settled over the assembly like a dark cloud. It was horrible to think about, but perhaps that was what they needed. Perhaps after millennia of civilization they had forgotten how to be truly savage. The Zarathi are not civilized, continued Kethvar. They do not follow our rules of engagement. They do not respect our diplomatic protocols. They simply consume everything in their path. Maybe we need allies who understand that kind of mindset. One by one, the representatives began to nod. It went against everything they believed in, but they were desperate. The alternative was extinction. Commander Yila Santos raised her tentacle. I vote to accept the human alliance. Seconded, said Ambassador Zeth Prime, though his crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. The vote was close, but it passed. 32 worlds voted in favor, 11 against. Admiral Kethvar activated his communication system. Dr. Velkim, please prepare a response to the human transmission. Tell them their offer is accepted. Provide them with our fastest jump route to Coalition space. As the message was sent across the void of space toward the blue and green world called Earth, none of the Coalition representatives truly understood what they had just done. They thought they were calling for help from fellow warriors. They thought they were inviting soldiers to stand beside them in honorable battle. They had no idea they had just summoned monsters. The space around Kepler Station had never seen anything like it. For 300 years, the massive orbital platform had served as the Coalition's primary diplomatic hub. Ships from across the galaxy docked there daily, bringing ambassadors and trade delegations in vessels that looked like floating works of art. The human ship that emerged from Fold space was not art. The TDS Reaper was a brutal thing, all sharp angles and dark metal. Where Coalition ships curved gracefully through space, this vessel looked like it had been built to ram through walls. Weapon ports covered its hull like scars, instead of the bright colors and decorative panels that marked civilized vessels. The human ship was painted in flat gray with warning symbols in red. Ambassador Zeth Prime watched from the station's observation deck as the ugly warship approached. His crystalline body flickered with nervous energy. Beside him, Commander Yila Santos adjusted her water-filled helmet and checked her breathing apparatus. Twice. It looks like a weapon with engines attached, muttered. Yila Santos through her translator. Perhaps that is what they intended, replied Zeth Prime, though his voice carried doubt. The docking process itself was disturbing. Coalition ships glided smoothly into their berths using gravity fields and magnetic guides. The human ship slammed into the docking clamps with a metallic crash that shook the entire section of the station. Red warning lights flashed as emergency systems activated to handle the impact. 20 minutes later, the airlock hissed open. Captain Jake Morris stepped onto Kepler Station wearing what could only be described as armor disguised as a uniform. His clothing was dark and functional, covered with equipment pouches and weapon attachments. Behind him came his crew, and the Coalition representatives got their first real look at humanity. They were predators. There was no other way to describe them. The way they moved, the way their eyes scanned everything, the way their hands rested near their weapons. These were not explorers or diplomats. These were hunters in the shape of thinking beings. "Ambassador Zeth Prime, Commander Yila Santos," said Captain Morris, extending his hand in what the aliens had been told was a human greeting. "Welcome aboard the Reaper. General Kane sends her regards." Zeth Prime touched the human's hand briefly and immediately regretted it. The skin was warm and rough, the grip firm enough to crack stone. This was a being built for violence. "We are pleased to meet our new allies," Zeth Prime managed to say. "Likewise, Dr. Amanda Clark, our xenobiologist, will be handling most of the cultural exchange work. She's waiting for us on the ship." As they walked through the Reaper's corridors, the Coalition representatives tried not to stare, but it was impossible to ignore what they were seeing. Human soldiers ran combat drills in the hallways, their boots pounding on metal decking. The walls were lined with weapons racks and emergency battle stations. Even the lighting was harsh and red, designed for combat visibility rather than comfort. They passed a group of Marines practicing hand-to-hand combat. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez was teaching Corporal Danny White how to break someone's neck with a single twist. The aliens watched in horror as the humans casually discussed the best ways to kill other thinking beings. "Training never stops," explained Captain Morris, noticing their stares. "The moment you get soft, you get dead." Dr. Amanda Clark met them in what the humans called the briefing room. She was smaller than the soldiers, but her eyes held the same predatory intelligence. She wore a white coat over military fatigues and carried a sidearm that looked capable of stopping a charging beast. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to chairs that had been modified for alien anatomy. "I know this must all seem strange to you." "Strange is one word for it," said Yila Santos carefully. Dr. Clark activated a holographic display. Images of human conflicts filled the air above the table. Explosions, burning cities, soldiers advancing through smoke and fire. "We understand you want to learn about human military capabilities," she said in a matter-of-fact tone. "These recordings should give you a good overview." What followed was 90 minutes of horror. The humans had fought wars that lasted decades. They had developed weapons that could level entire cities in seconds. They had strategies with names like Scorched Earth and Total Warfare that involved destroying everything an enemy might use, including civilian targets. "This conflict," Dr. Clark said, pointing to footage of soldiers fighting in ruined streets, "lasted 6 years and killed 50 million people. We learned valuable lessons about urban combat and population control." Zeth Prime's crystalline form had gone completely dark. "Population control? Moving civilians out of combat zones," Dr. Clark explained. "Or sometimes keeping them in place if their presence serves our tactical goals. Enemies are less likely to use heavy weapons if they might hit their own people." "You use civilians as shields?" Yila Santos asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We use whatever works," said Captain Morris. "The goal is victory. Everything else is secondary." Dr. Clark continued her presentation, showing battles where humans had pretended to surrender before attacking, conflicts where they had poisoned water supplies, wars where they had turned captured enemy equipment against its former owners. "This is barbaric," whispered Zeth Prime. "This is effective," corrected Dr. Clark. "Every tactic you see here was developed because it won battles. Humans have been at war with each other for 10,000 years. We have tried every possible way of fighting. We kept the methods that work." The aliens were shown weapons that fired depleted uranium rounds designed to punch through any known armor. They learned about psychological warfare, where humans would broadcast terrifying sounds to break enemy morale. They heard about something called acceptable casualties, which meant how many of your own people you were willing to let die to achieve your goals. "How many casualties are acceptable to humans?" asked Yila Santos. Captain Morris and Dr. Clark exchanged glances. "That depends on the objective," Morris said finally. "For protecting Earth? All of them if necessary." The briefing continued with technical specifications of human weapons. Their ships carried enough nuclear warheads to sterilize a planet. Their soldiers were trained to fight in any environment, from vacuum to underwater to toxic atmospheres. They had specialized units for different types of combat, including something called Special Forces, whose methods were apparently too classified to discuss. "What about prisoners?" asked Zeth Prime. "How do you treat captured enemies?" Dr. Clark pulled up new footage. It showed human interrogators questioning captured soldiers. "The methods were not gentle. We extract information efficiently," she said. "The Geneva Conventions establish certain rules, but those only apply to conflicts between human nations. We assume alien enemies will not follow our rules, so we prepare accordingly. The presentation ended with current human military strength, 50 ships as promised, but each one carried enough firepower to fight an entire coalition battle group. 20,000 soldiers, but each one trained to a level that would make coalition security officers look like children. Questions? Asked Dr. Clark cheerfully. Zeth Prime and Yila Santos sat in stunned silence. They had expected warriors, but these humans were something else entirely. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also scientists of violence. They had studied war the way coalition species studied art or philosophy. There is one thing I do not understand, Yila Santos said finally. You have all these weapons, all these tactics. Why have you not conquered other human nations? Captain Morris smiled, and the expression was not comforting. Who says we haven't? Earth has 200 nations now. It used to have thousands. The strong survive, the weak get absorbed. It's natural selection applied to civilizations. After the coalition representatives left, Dr. Clark found Captain Morris in his quarters, cleaning a rifle that was already spotless. They looked terrified, she observed. Good, Morris replied without looking up. Scared allies follow orders better than confident ones. Do you think they understand what they've gotten themselves into? Morris finally looked at her, his expression grim. No, they think they called for help. They don't realize they just invited the wolves into the henhouse, Dr. Clark nodded. Should we warn them? Too late for that. Besides, they need us. The Zarathi are coming, and pretty words won't stop them. Sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters. Back on Kepler Station, Zeth Prime sent a coded message to the Coalition Council. His crystalline form flickered with distress as he transmitted his report. The humans have arrived. They are not what we expected. They are efficient, ruthless, and completely without mercy. They view warfare as a science and practice it with the dedication we reserve for art. I fear we have made a terrible mistake, but I also fear it may be our only hope. These humans do not fight to win battles. They fight to eliminate their enemies completely. May the ancestors help us all. The mining colony of Tethys 7 had been a peaceful place for over 200 years. Its 3 million inhabitants worked the rich mineral deposits beneath the planet's surface and sent their children to schools that taught art and philosophy alongside basic engineering. The worst crime in decades had been someone stealing hover cycles from the transportation depot. That piece ended when the Zarathi scouting force landed. The bioships came down like falling meteors, each one the size of a city block. They crashed into the northern continent and immediately began to change. The organic vessels grew roots that burrowed deep into the soil, spreading like cancer through the planet's crust. Within hours, the ships had become living fortresses that pulsed with alien life. Admiral Beth Cora commanded the Coalition rescue fleet from her flagship, the Harmony of Stars. Her plan was simple and civilized. First, evacuate all civilians to safe zones in the southern hemisphere. Second, use precision orbital strikes to destroy the Zarathi positions without damaging the colony infrastructure. Third, land peacekeeping forces to secure the area and provide humanitarian aid. It was a good plan. It was the kind of plan that had worked for the Coalition for centuries. Colonel Sam Turner had a different plan. He stood in the briefing room of his transport ship, the Warhammer, addressing his Marine officers. The room was cramped and functional, with metal walls covered in tactical displays. Maps of Tethys 7 glowed red where Zarathi forces had landed. Forget evacuation, Turner said bluntly. Civilians stay put. They know the terrain better than we do. We arm them and use them as spotters and guides. Lieutenant Ryan Bell, fresh from the academy, raised his hand. Sir, Coalition protocol requires civilian evacuation from combat zones. Coalition protocol assumes your enemy follows rules, replied Turner. The Zarathi don't. They'll hunt down every civilian whether they're in safe zones or not. Better to give people weapons and let them fight for their own lives. Staff Sergeant Nicole Martinez nodded approval. She had been fighting in colonial brush wars for 8 years and understood what Turner meant. What about the orbital strikes, sir? Turner gestured to the tactical display. Forget precision. We level everything in a 20-kilometer radius around each landing site. If there might be Zarathi there, we destroy it. That will eliminate most of the northern cities, said Bell, horrified. Yes, it will. Better to lose empty buildings than live people. The Zarathi adapt to our weapons, remember? They learn from every engagement. So we don't give them time to learn. We hit them with everything at once, harder than they expect. Admiral Beth Cora's voice crackled over the communication system. Colonel Turner, we are beginning civilian evacuation operations. Please coordinate with our transport ships. Turner keyed his transmitter. Negative, Admiral. We're implementing Alternative Protocol 7. There was silence on the channel for a moment. Colonel, there is no Alternative Protocol 7. There is now. What followed was 3 days of warfare unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. The humans landed in the middle of Zarathi territory, not at the edges. They came down in heavily armored drop pods that smashed through the organic fortresses like artillery shells. The Marines inside emerged fighting. Private Kevin Johnson rigged the first captured Zarathi warrior with explosives and sent it walking back toward its own lines before detonating it. The psychological effect was devastating. The Zarathi had never encountered an enemy that used their own dead as weapons. Medic Helen Foster set up aid stations in the ruins of Tethys 7's cities, treating wounded civilians and Marines alike. But she also interrogated every wounded Zarathi they captured, using field surgery techniques to keep them alive long enough to extract tactical information. They feel pain differently than we do, she reported to Colonel Turner. Their nervous system responds better to electrical stimulation than traditional torture methods. The civilians of Tethys 7 found themselves handed weapons they had never seen before. Human rifles that could punch holes through solid rock, grenades that created clouds of razor-sharp metal fragments, landmines that could be triggered remotely. Point this end at the bad guys and pull the trigger, Sergeant Martinez told a group of terrified miners. The rifle does the rest. But we are not soldiers, protested one of the colonists. You are now, Martinez replied. The Zarathi don't care if you're a soldier or a teacher or a shop clerk. They'll eat you all the same, so you can learn to fight, or you can learn to be dinner. The orbital bombardment began on the second day. Coalition ships fired surgical strikes at specific Zarathi positions, trying to minimize collateral damage. Human ships unleashed everything they had: nuclear warheads, kinetic bombardment rounds, and something called planet crackers that could split continents. You are destroying everything, Admiral Beth Cora protested over the communication channel. Yes, we are, replied Colonel Turner calmly. And it's working. He was right. The Zarathi had adapted to precise coalition attacks by spreading out and hiding among civilian structures. They had not adapted to having entire regions turned into radioactive glass. The bioships that had been growing stronger with each passing hour suddenly found themselves cut off from their food sources and bombarded with more firepower than they could absorb. But the humans were not done. On the third day, Turner ordered what he called mop-up operations. Marines went through the ruined Zarathi positions with flamethrowers, burning everything organic they could find. They planted sensors that would detect any surviving Zarathi life signs and trigger automatic weapon systems. We leave nothing alive, Turner explained to his officers. Not a single Zarathi cell. If even one survives, it can grow into a new bioship given time. The Coalition forces watched in horror as human soldiers executed wounded Zarathi without hesitation. They saw Marines use captured Zarathi biotechnology to create new weapons, turning the aliens' own adaptive abilities against them. They witnessed the systematic destruction of everything the Zarathi had touched, down to the soil itself. This is not warfare, whispered Admiral Beth Cora to her aide. This is extermination. Yes, it is, said Dr. Amanda Clark, who had been monitoring Coalition communications from the human command ship. That's the point. The battle ended after 72 hours. Every Zarathi organism on Tethys 7 was dead. The bioships had been reduced to burning husks. The northern continent looked like the surface of a dead moon, cratered and poisoned, but the colony survived. 2.5 million civilians were still alive, armed and organized into militia units that could defend themselves if the Zarathi returned. Admiral Beth Cora filed her report with shaking hands. The Zarathi scouting force has been eliminated. Casualties among Coalition forces minimal. Casualties among human forces, 12 dead, 37 wounded. Civilian casualties, approximately 400,000. She paused before adding the next line. Mission success rate 100%. The humans achieved complete tactical victory in less than half the time our projections estimated. Colonel Turner received a message from General Kane back on Earth. Excellent work. Sam, the Coalition is impressed with our efficiency. They're asking for human assistance with 3 more Zarathi incursions. Turner smiled grimly as he looked out at the ruins of Tethys 7. Of course they are. They're starting to understand that sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters. In the medical bay, Medic Foster finished treating the last wounded Marine. Corporal Danny White had taken Zarathi acid burns across his chest but would recover fully. "Doc," he said as she bandaged his wounds, "the Coalition troops keep looking at us funny, like they're afraid of us or something." Foster glanced toward the Coalition medical personnel, who were clustered at the far end of the bay, whispering among themselves and casting nervous glances at the humans. "They are afraid of us. Danny, we just showed them what human warfare really looks like. They called us here to fight their battles, but they didn't expect us to be so good at it. Is that a bad thing?" Foster considered the question as she sealed his bandages. Outside the medical bay, human Marines were training Coalition civilians in guerrilla warfare tactics. In orbit, human warships were installing weapon systems that could sterilize planets if necessary. "Ask me in a few years," she said finally, "when we see what the galaxy looks like after we're done saving it." The Emergency Council meeting convened in the deepest levels of Coalition Command, 3 kilometers below the surface of New Geneva. 12 billion beings called the planet home, making it the most populous world in known space. It was also directly in the path of the largest Zarathi fleet ever assembled. Admiral Kethvar stood before the holographic display that showed the approaching threat. The Zarathi bioships had grown massive during their journey through Coalition space. Each vessel now dwarfed the largest Coalition dreadnoughts, and there were over 500 of them heading straight for New Geneva. "Our intelligence reports show complete adaptation," he announced to the assembled Coalition leadership. "The Zarathi have analyzed every weapon we used against them. Their bioarmor now resists plasma cannons, particle beams, and even nuclear weapons. They have learned to absorb energy attacks and convert them into biological mass." Commander Yila Santos adjusted her water-filled helmet nervously. "How long until they arrive?" 18 days, replied Kethvar. "Our defense fleet can delay them, but we cannot stop them. We need at least 6 months to develop new countermeasures." "What about evacuation?" asked Ambassador Zeth Prime. "Impossible. 12 billion beings cannot be moved in 18 days. Besides, where would we take them? The Zarathi have consumed 17 systems. Soon there will be nowhere to run." The council chamber fell silent except for the hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of millions of beings going about their lives above, unaware that their world was doomed. The silence broke when the chamber doors hissed open. General Patricia Kane walked in wearing full military dress uniform, her boots clicking on the metal floor. Behind her came Admiral Richard Fox and a woman the Coalition representatives did not recognize. "Dr. Michelle Grant," Kane said by way of introduction, "our head of biological warfare research." Dr. Grant was a small woman with cold eyes and hands that never stopped moving. She carried a briefcase that made several Coalition members step back instinctively. "General Kane," said Kethvar carefully, "we did not request a meeting." "No, you didn't, but you need one." Kane activated her own holographic display. The image showed New Geneva surrounded by human warships. "We have a solution to your Zarathi problem." "A solution?" Yila Santos leaned forward. "What kind of solution?" Admiral Fox took over the presentation. "Operation Prometheus. We divided into 3 phases. Phase 1, psychological warfare. We broadcast surrender messages on all Coalition frequencies, making the Zarathi think they have already won." "Surrender?" Zeth Prime's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "But that would lower our people's morale." "That's the point," said Dr. Grant in a voice like ice. "Demoralized populations behave predictably. They cluster in designated safe areas, making them easier to protect or easier to sacrifice depending on what the tactical situation requires." Kane continued the briefing. Phase 2, false flag operations. We use captured Zarathi biotechnology to attack Coalition military targets. This will confuse their coordination and make them think some of their bioships have gone rogue. You want to attack our own forces? Admiral Beth Cora had just arrived and caught the end of the explanation. "That is madness. That is strategy," corrected Admiral Fox. "The Zarathi operate as a hive mind. If we can make them doubt their own units, their entire command structure breaks down." Dr. Grant opened her briefcase. Inside were dozens of small vials filled with various colored liquids. Phase 3, biological warfare. We release genetically modified viruses designed to target Zarathi nervous systems. The viruses will spread through their bioships and destroy their ability to coordinate. You created diseases that can kill the Zarathi? Asked Yila Santos, hope creeping into her voice. We created diseases that can kill anything, Grant replied matter-of-factly. The Zarathi-specific strain is just one variant. We have versions that target every known species in the Coalition as well. The chamber temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Coalition representatives stared at the human scientist in horror. You have weapons that could destroy all of us? Whispered Zeth Prime. Of course, it would be irresponsible not to have contingency plans. Dr. Grant's expression never changed. What if one of your species becomes hostile in the future? What if we need leverage in trade negotiations? What if coalition worlds need to be depopulated for strategic reasons? General Kane stepped forward before the aliens could respond. The important thing is that we can save New Geneva, but we need complete authority to implement Operation Prometheus. No interference, no second-guessing, no moral objections. Admiral Kethvar found his voice. What you describe sounds like war crimes. War crimes are a luxury for species that can afford to lose, Kane replied. You called us because you were facing extinction. We offered to save you. Now you want to criticize our methods? Captain Tony Adams entered the chamber at that moment, still wearing his flight suit. General, the kamikaze squadrons are ready. We have 40 volunteers prepared for suicide runs if the bioweapons fail. Kamikaze? Admiral Beth Cora looked confused. Suicide attacks, explained Adams casually. Pilots ram their fighters directly into enemy ships. Very effective against large targets that can't maneuver quickly. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake followed Adams into the room, carrying a data tablet. General, I've finished the casualty projections for Operation Prometheus. We're looking at acceptable losses of 4 to 6 coalition worlds if we need to create strategic barriers. Acceptable losses? Zeth Prime's crystalline form had turned completely black. You would sacrifice entire worlds? If necessary, Blake replied. Better to lose 6 worlds than lose all of them. It's basic mathematics. Major Chris Thompson was the last human to enter the briefing. His uniform bore the insignia of Special Operations, and something about his presence made even the other humans uncomfortable. General, the sterilization protocols are ready, he reported quietly. If the Zarathi manage to land on any coalition world, we can deploy planet-killer missiles to ensure no infestation survives. Planet-killer missiles? Gila Santos asked weakly. Nuclear weapons designed to crack planetary crusts, Thompson explained. Complete sterilization down to the molecular level. Nothing survives, but nothing can be infected either. The coalition representatives sat in stunned silence. They had thought the humans would help them fight the Zarathi. Instead, the humans had prepared to destroy entire worlds to prevent Zarathi victory. General Kane looked around the room at the horrified alien faces. Do you want to hear our terms? Terms? Managed Kethvar. Complete authority over coalition military forces during the crisis. Access to all coalition intelligence networks. Permission to recruit from coalition populations. Establishment of permanent human military bases on 40 worlds. And full pardons for any actions we take during the implementation of Operation Prometheus. You want us to give you control of our entire military, whispered Ambassador Zeth Prime. Want you to let us save your civilization, Kane corrected. The Zarathi are 18 days away. Our plan will stop them completely. Your current strategy will result in the extinction of every intelligent species in this galaxy. Admiral Fox activated a new display showing human fleet positions. We already have ships in position around New Geneva. We already have operatives on 40 coalition worlds. We already have biological agents ready for deployment. You can either authorize our actions officially, or we can proceed without your permission. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The humans were not asking for permission. They were offering the coalition a choice between cooperation and irrelevance. Commander Yila Santos spoke first, her voice barely audible. If we refuse, then you face the Zarathi alone, said Kane. And when your worlds are burning, remember that you chose to maintain your principles instead of accepting our help. Admiral Kethvar looked at his fellow coalition leaders. They were trapped between 2 monsters, the Zarathi who would consume them, and the humans who would save them at a price they could barely imagine. How do we know you will stop after the Zarathi are defeated? Asked Zeth Prime. General Kane smiled, and the expression held no warmth. You don't. But you know what happens if the Zarathi aren't defeated. At least with us, you have a chance to remain alive to regret your decision. The vote was unanimous. They had no choice. "Operation Prometheus is authorized," said Admiral Kithvar, his voice hollow. "Excellent," said Kane. "Dr. Grant, begin biological agent deployment. Admiral Fox, initiate Phase 1 psychological operations. Major Thompson, prepare sterilization protocols for any world that shows signs of Zarathi contamination." As the humans filed out of the chamber, Kane paused at the door. "You made the right choice. Your people will survive this war, but they will survive it as a species under human protection. Remember that when you write the history books." The coalition leaders sat alone in their chamber, understanding finally what they had done. They had not just called for help. They had surrendered their independence to the very monsters they had summoned to save them. The Battle of New Geneva lasted exactly 14 hours and 23 minutes. When it ended, the Zarathi swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years no longer existed. Admiral Richard Fox stood on the bridge of humanity's newest dreadnought, the Nemesis, watching the final bioship burn against the starfield. Around him, human officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency, already planning for the next phase of operations. "Last confirmed Zarathi vessel destroyed," reported Captain Jake Morris from his position at the tactical display. "All biosignatures are negative. The swarm is extinct." Fox nodded and activated his communication system. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Fox. Operation Prometheus is complete. Begin recovery operations and prepare for occupation duties." The word occupation was not lost on the coalition forces listening to human communications. They had noticed that the humans did not say cleanup or assistance. They said occupation. Dr. Amanda Clark stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching human transports land on New Geneva. Beside her, Ambassador Zeth Prime stared at the scene with his crystalline form completely dark. "Your people saved us," he said quietly. "We should be grateful." "But you're not," Clark observed. "How can we be grateful to those who terrify us more than our enemies did?" Clark did not answer immediately. Below them, human Marines were setting up checkpoints around New Geneva's major cities. The signs were in both Coalition Standard and Earth languages, but the meaning was clear. Humans were now in charge. The battle itself had been a masterpiece of controlled destruction. Operation Prometheus had worked exactly as planned. Phase 1. Psychological warfare had convinced half the Coalition population to evacuate to designated safe zones, making them easier to protect. The false surrender broadcasts had also made the Zarathi overconfident, causing them to spread their forces thin as they prepared for easy victory. Phase 2. False flag operations had thrown the Zarathi hive mind into chaos. When human forces using captured Zarathi technology attacked their own bioships, the aliens could not understand what was happening. Their perfect coordination broke down as they began to distrust their own units. Phase 3 biological warfare had been the killing blow. Dr. Michelle, Grant's engineered viruses had spread through the Zarathi fleet like wildfire. The aliens' own adaptive abilities had worked against them, as their bioships tried to absorb and analyze the viruses, only to have their nervous systems shut down from within. But it was the human follow-up that truly impressed and terrified the coalition forces. Captain Tony Adams had led his fighter squadrons in precise strikes against every disabled bioship, ensuring none could recover. Sergeant Nicole Martinez and her Marines had boarded the largest vessels to plant fusion charges that would leave nothing but radioactive dust. Major Chris Thompson's special operations teams had deployed to every system where Zarathi forces had been detected, sterilizing entire regions of space to ensure no organism could survive. They left nothing to chance, nothing to hope, nothing to luck. The Zarathi swarm was not just defeated. It was eliminated so completely that future xenobiologists would debate whether the species had ever existed at all. Now, 3 days after the battle, the galaxy was learning what victory looked like under human leadership. Colonel Sam Turner stood in what had been the Coalition Council chambers, reading reports from 40 worlds. His Marines had established bases on every major planet in Coalition space, all under the authority of Operation Prometheus. "Status report from Altair Prime," he announced to the assembled human commanders. "Local population is cooperating with security protocols. Minor resistance from former military officers. Nothing we can't handle." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake looked up from her tactical displays. Vorthon resistance movement is more organized. They're trying to coordinate with other species to restore coalition independence. Recommendations? Asked Turner. Standard counterinsurgency operations. Arrest the leaders. Relocate potential troublemakers. Establish human oversight for all local governments. General Patricia Kane's voice crackled through the communication system from Earth. Negative on relocations. We need the local population stable and productive. Use economic pressure instead. Cut off trade and resource allocation to resistant worlds until they comply. Dr. Clark had been monitoring coalition communications and stepped forward. General, I should point out that several coalition species are discussing armed resistance. They view our presence as an occupation force. Because that's exactly what we are, Kane replied matter-of-factly. Did they expect us to save them and then leave? Did they think we would go back to Earth and wait for the next crisis to call us? Admiral Fox joined the conversation from his ship. The galaxy is safer with human oversight. We've proven we can eliminate threats the coalition couldn't handle. It's only logical that we maintain that capability. Turner nodded agreement. The coalition had 3 years to stop the Zarathi and failed. We did it in 2 weeks. That proves our military systems are superior to theirs. On New Geneva, medic Helen Foster was treating coalition civilians at a human-run medical facility. The care was excellent, far better than most coalition worlds had ever received. But every patient noticed the armed guards at the doors and the surveillance equipment in every room. Why are there soldiers here? Asked a young Neptari female as Foster treated her injuries. For your protection, Foster replied honestly. There are still people who think the old ways were better. People who might try to hurt those who accept human help. Are we prisoners? Foster paused in her work. It was a good question, and she was not sure of the answer. You're safe. That's what matters. Private Kevin Johnson was training coalition youth in human military tactics. His students were eager to learn, especially after seeing how effectively human methods worked against the Zarathi. But Johnson noticed they learned the lessons too well, asking questions about weapons that could be used against human forces. Teaching them to fight might be a mistake, he reported to Sergeant Martinez. They're smart. They'll figure out how to use our own methods against us. Martinez shrugged. Let them try. We've been fighting humans for 10,000 years. Fighting aliens will be easy by comparison. Ambassador Zeth Prime called an emergency meeting of the surviving coalition leadership. They gathered in secret on a mining station in the Outer Rim, far from human surveillance. We must discuss our situation honestly, he began. The humans saved us from the Zarathi, but they have not returned our independence. Commander Yila Santos activated a secure communication system. I've been monitoring human military traffic. They're not planning to leave, ever. They refer to coalition space as Terran-protected territories. What are our options? Asked Admiral Kethvar. Limited, admitted Admiral Beth Cora. They control our military bases, our communication networks, and our supply lines. Any organized resistance would be crushed immediately. Perhaps we should be grateful, suggested one delegate. They did save us from extinction. At the cost of our freedom, replied Zeth Prime. We traded one form of death for another form of life. The question is whether that was worth it. The debate continued for hours but reached no resolution. The coalition leadership finally accepted what their people were learning. They lived now at the pleasure of their human protectors. Back on New Geneva, Dr. Clark sat in her new office reviewing cultural integration reports. Outside her window, human and coalition children played together in parks patrolled by Marine guards. The scene looked peaceful, almost normal. Her assistant knocked and entered. Doctor, there's a transmission from Earth. General Kane wants to speak with you. Kane's image appeared on the holographic display as stern as ever. Amanda, I need your assessment. How long before the coalition populations accept permanent human oversight? Clark considered the question carefully. The older generations may never accept it completely, but the young ones are adapting quickly. Give it 20 years and human authority will seem normal to them. Good, and resistance movements? They exist, but they're disorganized and lack resources. As long as we maintain control of military assets and economic systems, they pose no real threat. Kane nodded. Excellent. The President is pleased with our progress. Earth is officially establishing the Terran Galactic Authority to administer our new territories. After the call ended, Clark sat alone in her office, thinking about what they had accomplished. The galaxy was safe. Billions of beings could live their lives without fear of extinction. Trade was flowing, technology was advancing, and conflicts were being resolved through human mediation rather than warfare. But they had also created something unprecedented: a galactic empire ruled by a species that had never asked permission to rule. Her computer chimed with a new message from the Outer Rim colonies. The text was simple but telling. The Zarathi swarm is extinct. We are safe from them now, but we are not safe. Dr. Clark deleted the message and made a note to increase surveillance on the Outer Rim. Then she returned to her reports documenting the birth of humanity's galactic empire. Outside, human ships patrolled the space lanes while Coalition citizens went about their daily lives under the watchful eyes of their new protectors. The galaxy had called for saviors and received monsters instead.